Hey there guys, how's it going? Back with another video. So, I don't really want to pick on Deontay Wilder too much because, let's be honest, he's become a bit of an easy target at this point. And, when a fighter loses and when they're at a low point in their career, I don't usually like to kick that fighter while they're down. I don't like to be too critical of fighters after they're defeated. Even if it's a fighter that I don't personally like, when that fighter loses, I'm not gonna come on here and gloat and be an asshole. I'm not really that's just not my style. But in regards to Deontay Wilder, and I'm not really here to attack Deontay Wilder. I'm not making this video, to just be disrespectful towards him. This is more of a retrospective video, if anything, on just the state of boxing in general. And not only that, but what kind of inspired me to make the video is the whole aftermath of what's gone on with the Tyson Fury Wilder situation, the ridiculous, just absolute nonsensical drivel that we've been hearing from Team Wilder and from the Wilder fans, and just that whole contingent of the boxing community that was so emotionally invested in Wilder, and from Wilder's own family. Just the drivel that we've been hearing from these people really lit a fire under my ass and convinced me to make this video because I've got to be honest, man. When you look at Deontay Wilder's career, let's say you look at his career in retrospect, you go back and look at his old fights, but not only look at his old fights, look at the way he was managed and the way that his entire run as a fighter up until the Tyson Fury fight, the way that it was all officiated, and the way that he was sort of coached and manufactured as a fighter to become champion. When you look at Deontay Wilder's career and resume in retrospect, it's actually pretty damn shocking. Now, the word hype job in boxing gets thrown around left, right, and centre to the point where it's almost become a cliche at this point. I mean, every time a fighter loses, oh, he's a hype job. Every time a fighter has a tough fight, like say a fighter like Lomachenko gets knocked down, or Triple G takes a few punches and gets marked up, he's a hype job. He's the worst fighter ever. He's a piece of shit. He's crap. He's Glass Joe. People tend to over exaggerate and overly use that term hype job. But I have to be honest, I just have to call it as I see it. I don't think there is another fighter in the history of boxing who was as artificially hyped as Deontay Wilder. A fighter that was so shockingly bad and so shockingly protected to the point where he was able to amass a record on paper that most fighters couldn't even dream of, and was able to go on such a long and successful run as champion, while fighting absolutely nobody and being hyped up to no end and being so highly regarded by the mainstream boxing media and being able to generate so much controversy online and being able to stir up so much shit in the boxing community. Like when you take all that into consideration, when you think of just the absolute impact that this guy had on boxing with such um, with such a lack of ability, just all round ability, it's really shocking. And what's also really shocking to me is just the way that this guy was brought along, the rules that were bent in order to keep this guy winning, the fights that, in my opinion, were blatantly, blatantly fabricated and blatantly manipulated. I mean, there was just so much corruption and so much fuckery surrounding Deontay Wilder that it's absolutely flipping disgusting. I mean, the first 40 or so pro fights of this guy's career, he just scraped the absolute bottom of the barrel. I mean, if you go back and look at Deontay Wilder's early career, after he came out of the amateurs, and let's not forget the guy was an Olympian. Okay, he was an Olympic bronze medalist, and I know he came to the game a little bit late, but let's be honest, okay? When you win a medal in the Olympics and you then transition over to the pros, you expect that, you expect a fighter of that sort of caliber to be brought along steadily. You expect them to have a gradual increase in opposition over the years. What you don't expect them to do is fight just absolute cans for about a decade. I mean, to turn pro in 2008 and spend the next 10 years or so fighting fat middleweights and you know, guys that don't even, you know, guys that you look at them and you think, how do these guys even get a license to box? I mean, I look at some of these guys Deontay Wilder fought in the early part of his career, guys that were like 5'10", 5'11", you know, with a big belly that hangs below their knees. You know, the type of guys that look as if they're diabetic. You know, they look as if they've got you know, serious health issues, and they really shouldn't be fighting. And and you're seeing them fight this big, tall, athletic, 6'7" former basketball player who's won a you know, won a shit ton of fights. You know, by first round knockout, and you look at his record, and you look at him fighting these guys, and it's like it's reminiscent of a schoolyard bully beating up the little kids, you know, beating up all the little fat kids and stealing their money. That's what it was like seeing Deontay Wilder fight some of these guys. But the shocking thing about it is, and the most disturbing thing about it, in my opinion, is that even though he was scraping the absolute bottom of the barrel and fighting just the easiest and lowest level of opposition possible, he wasn't even looking good doing it. Okay, Deontay Wilder was getting stunned by fat middleweights. You know, he even got dropped a couple of times. He got dropped by Dustin Nichols. He got dropped by that other journeyman, Sconiers. Um, and then when he did start to sort of fight for you know, fight somewhat borderline contenders. It was just so pathetic what they did, man. I mean, they were literally paying guys to just lay down for him. I mean, the Mallet Scott situation was a prime example of this. The rematch against Bermane Stiverne. I mean, the first fight against Bermane Stiverne showed up badly out of shape. He showed up, you know, with an illness apparently. Yet he still went 12 rounds with Wilder. Was never seriously hurt. You know, never really looked like he was in any serious distress in that fight. You know, he was able to go 12 rounds. He was durable enough to take the punches. Then in the rematch, he takes one shot and he goes down like a sack of spuds. It was pathetic. Just one of the most blatant dives I think I've ever seen. You know, Wilder was caught up in that whole PBC realm where Al Heyman was basically bringing these guys in to just stand right in front of him and just let him land the right hand, and there you go, fight's over. Um, and then this myth developed, you know, this narrative that Wilder had this insane, like amazing knockout power, that he was like the biggest punching heavyweight in boxing history, that he hit harder than Mike Tyson, that he hit harder than the Klitschko's, he hit harder than every heavyweight in history, he hit harder than Lennox Lewis, he was the best athlete of all time, and just the shit that we were having to deal with on here, and it used to piss me off. Like, it used to really, really irritate me when I would hear, um, you know, experts in the boxing industry, you know, the boxing media talk about Wilder's right hand like it's the greatest thing they've ever seen. And I had to point out constantly in these videos that, guys, it took Wilder 11 rounds to stop Johann Duhaupas, the same guy that has been knocked out in the early rounds on several occasions now. Okay, look at the Povetkin fight. Look at some of his other fights. I mean, it took Wilder 11 rounds of just a sustained beating, sustained punishment, in order to finally force the referee to stop the fight. Um, it took Wilder 9 rounds to knock out Artur Szpilka, the same Artur Szpilka that has already been knocked out by Brian Jennings in the earlier rounds. He was knocked out in 2 rounds by Derek Chisora. He was knocked out in 3 rounds by Adam Kaunatsky. None of those guys I just mentioned, Adam Kaunatsky, Derek Chisora, or Bryant Jennings, none of those guys are in contention for biggest punching heavyweights of all time, are they? So the fact that all of those guys were able to just destroy Artur Szpilka, yeah, it took Deontay Wilder 9 rounds, you know, to come from behind, because he was losing that fight, to come from behind to finally land a fully fledged, full charged, well placed, accurate right hand on the chin that Artur Szpilka moved right into. Okay, so it landed with full force, you know, and he was he was in a southpaw stance, so he was sort of perfectly lined up for it. It took just the perfect shot from Wilder to get a guy like Artur fucking Szpilka out in the 9th round. And because of that, people think that Wilder is like the biggest puncher of all time. People saying he hits harder than Lennox Lewis and Vladimir Klitschko and stuff like that. Just absolute. Oh, that used to wind me up. It really did. I mean, you would see Wilder getting outboxed by journeyman level heavyweight people like people like Gerald Washington was outboxing him before he got prematurely stopped for no reason whatsoever. I mean, again, it was one of them PBC stoppages. I mean, Wilder for a fat out of shape Chris Arreola who took the fight on a few weeks' notice. And then the thing with Deontay Wilder that also pissed me off, and it's part of the reason I wanted to make this video, is how much money and how much corruption and how much fuckery and skullduggery that was involved in keeping this guy safe from dangerous contenders. Now, every single time, does anybody else here not think that it's a little tad bit suspicious that every single time this guy had to fight a real opponent, opponent who wouldn't lay down for him, an opponent who was, up there in the rankings and who was coming for the title, every time that happened, what happened? There was a failed drug test. Okay, a failed, and I use the word failed in quotations, and I've spoke many times on here about how drug testing in boxing is used as a weapon. We call it weaponized drug testing, and it's essentially used to keep fighters like Deontay Wilder safe from facing real competition. There was the whole thing with Povetkin, total stitch up job. If to anybody who looks into that situation, you can tell it was a total stitch up. The same thing happened with Dillian White, with Ortiz, with Varsic. All these guys who, were up there in the rankings and who were a threat to Deontay Wilder and a threat to his reign as champion, all of a sudden mysteriously fail a drug test. It was shocking, man. It was absolutely fucking pathetic. I mean, the lengths that they went to protect this guy was flat out pathetic. Then it came to Tyson Fury. Now, Tyson Fury had been on a binge, basically a coke binge. He'd been out of the ring for a couple of years. He'd be engaged in alcoholism, junk food. He'd been going through depression. He'd been dealing with a lot of mental health issues and stuff like that. He came back, and Deontay Wilder essentially decided to cherry pick him. That was essentially what that first fight was. It was a cherry pick gone wrong. Deontay Wilder and his team saw an opportunity to fight an out of shape, underprepared Tyson Fury, and they thought that look, they were getting him at the right time. Then of course it backfired on them because the fight ended up as a draw, and they then had to give Tyson Fury a rematch. Of course, we saw what happened in the rematch, and now that brings us to where we are now with Deontay Wilder. Because of all the things I just mentioned, because of all the skullduggery and all the false narratives and all the hype that was surrounding this guy, when he ultimately met his inevitable fate, when he ultimately got bitch slapped by an in shape, motivated Tyson Fury, not the out of shape recovering alcoholic Tyson Fury that he fought the first time. No, he fought an actual in shape Tyson Fury who had a proper training camp this time and had a proper trainer in his corner. And then the inevitable happened. Deontay Wilder got absolutely humiliated and exposed, and not only beaten, but he was beaten in a certain fashion that's hard to recover from. He took a sustained battering in the fight, and even though you had a black American referee who was on Tyson Fury's case and was trying to do everything he could to keep Deontay Wilder in the fight, give him every chance he could to win, it wasn't enough, and Wilder got beaten down, he got exposed, he got humiliated, and because of all the hype and narratives that were out there on this guy being the biggest puncher of all time and being such a great athlete, people couldn't believe it. They just couldn't bring themselves to believe that their hero, their greatest punching heavyweight of all time, had gotten exposed by a guy like Tyson Fury. So what they then decided to do was they decided to latch on to every single excuse, every single inconsistency that they could find in order to delegitimize the loss. I mean, you're seeing pimps on here like that fat cunt 78 Sports TV, or that other fat cunt, Dante's Boxing Nation, all these big, dumb, retarded black supremacists who had put so much stock into Deontay Wilder, coming up with these conspiracy theories. Now, it's funny to me. See, this is the thing about the boxing community that just makes me shake my head in just complete disappointment. It's funny to me when I make a video talking about a fighter who may have potentially loaded his gloves, because I point out some inconsistencies. I point out the fact that this particular fighter, and I'm not going to use his name in this video, but I point out that a particular fighter was able to get away with not having his wraps observed by a member of the opponent's team in his hometown. I put, I point out the fact that the trainer of that said opponent brought this up in a press conference, and tried to bring light to it that it was swept under the carpet. I point out the fact that this fighter did something in the ring that he's never done before, which is keep his gloves on until the cameras were gone. I pointed out all those inconsistencies in that video and made a presentation about it, just speculating on what I saw, based on what I'd researched and what I noticed at the time. And I got absolutely destroyed for that video. I got absolutely slaughtered. I got bashed. I got called a hater. I got called a piece of shit, a conspiracy theorist. And I'm sure if you guys have followed my channel, you know what I'm talking about. I got so much shit for that video. I got threatened with legal action. Just so much shit I got for that video that it was ridiculous. Yet this situation here with Tyson Fury, we have a situation where you can clearly see footage of Tyson Fury in the changing room having his hands wrapped. Deontay Wilder's co-trainer JD's is in the room with him. Okay, he's looking at the wraps. He's smiling. He's having a good time. Okay, the commissioner there. There was so much media attention on this fight. There was cameras everywhere. He took the gloves off after the fight. I mean, you could see the wraps. Everything was above board. There was absolutely no cause for concern whatsoever. Yet you've got all these channels on here now making all these conspiracy theories, all these videos talking about Tyson Fury had loaded gloves, he was on steroids, he had, the padding removed from his gloves, or his hands were being wrapped illegally, or, he was fighting dirty, this, that, and it's all this conspiracy shit that they're coming up with, and all these baseless accusations, and somehow they're able to get away with it. Yet when I do something like that, and I provide clear evidence and clear inconsistencies of a situation just like that, I get slaughtered, I get attacked, I get called disingenuous, I get called a hater, this, that, and the other. But these guys and their viewing audience of absolute fucking morons. I mean, go and look at the comment sections of one of these videos. Go on that piece of shit Dante Boxing Nation's channel and look at the comments he gets when he does a conspiracy theory about Wilder, and all these people saying that, again, with no cause for concern whatsoever, no evidence, no inconsistencies, nothing. Only the only inconsistency in the minds of these people is the fact that their hero, the guy that they thought, because the boxing media lied to them, they thought was a great fighter, they thought was one of the best heavyweights of all time, and one of the biggest punchers of all time, and one of the best athletes of all time. The fact that that guy got knocked the fuck out by a white man is what is the inconsistency here. That's what these people can't get their heads around. So they come up with these conspiracy theories, they latch on to these ideas, and yeah, they just get absolutely caught up in this nonsense because they can't bring themselves to believe that their hero got knocked out. And that is why I say that Deontay Wilder is probably the biggest hype job in the history of boxing. And again, this hype job is a word that gets thrown around. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there, when Mike Tyson first lost a fight, when he got knocked out by Douglas, I'm sure there were some people back then who would have called him a hype job, but at least he had a legitimate run as champion before that point. He actually knocked out some world level heavyweights, whereas Deontay Wilder won a vacant belt that was vacated by the great Vitaly Klitschko. who Wilder could have fought when he was a contender, but he opted not to fight Vitaly Klitschko. And yeah, when Vitaly decided to go into politics and vacate his title, it was then picked up by that fat lump of shit, Bermane Stiverne. And yeah, Wilder saw his opportunity and got the title. And since then, he went a good few years without fighting a mandatory. The only mandatories that he fought were, of course, Stavern was one of them, and Dominic Breazeale, guys like that. So the mandatories that Deontay Wilder fought were mandatories that the WBC knew that he would be happy with. Basically, they sort of manipulated those rankings. They used fake drug tests to get potential dangerous opponents out the way. Because let's be honest, Povetkin would have knocked the shit out of Deontay Wilder. If that fight had happened in 2016, Povetkin would have absolutely exposed him. He would have done the same thing to Wilder that Tyson Fury did. Maybe not as quick, but he would have definitely done it. He would have definitely knocked Deontay Wilder out. I mean, Dillian White would have done the same. He would have knocked Deontay Wilder out. And as far as Luis Ortiz goes, Luis Ortiz was an overrated fighter who was in his 40s by the time Wilder got him. So I don't really and that was a really tough fight. He gave Wilder a beating, beat the shit out of him, and yeah, busted him up in there and should have really stopped him. But the referee and the ringside doctor, of course, protected Wilder. Gave him more time to recover. So that's more evidence right there of corruption in Wilder's favour. So Wilder is a joke. He's a disgrace to boxing, and he is the biggest hype job in the history of boxing. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. I really don't. I would definitely say, and this video has gone on too long, but yeah, man, it's shocking. Deontay Wilder, he will go down in history as one of the biggest laughing stocks in boxing. So yeah, that's all I've got to say really. Yeah, so it's a sad situation what went on with Wilder. It really is. So I mean, it was talk about a rise and fall. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching, and God bless.